What a testament to the man, James Montgomery. You all came out on a Monday to pay tribute to Mr. Mont. I first want to talk about James a little bit. I first met James, I was 16 years old, and I was taking a New Testament class at Columbia High School. Been a long time ago. So I knew you as Mr. Mont. And then I went to work for TV20, and I became a news reporter and learned to know you as Commissioner James Montgomery. And now you worked at the college, and so there was a third phase of that where you were my colleague and my friend, and we want to welcome you. We're so glad you're here, and we hope that you can stick around and talk to the people who love you very, very much here this morning. I'm going to start things off by bringing our first speaker, who is going to introduce our guest speaker, someone that is a colleague of James here at Florida Gateway College, Jay Swisher. Jay?
Thank you. I'm Jay Swisher, Director of the Public Safety Training Center here at Florida Gateway College. And I, like many of you, was a student of Mr. Mont's. And I, like all of us here today, am still a student of Mr. Mont's. 2 weeks ago, when I first called my classmate and close friend, Jess Johnson, and told him that Mr. Mont had requested that he speak at this event today, Jess was in New York on a business trip, having just returned from London from another business trip. But Jess's response was, if that's what Mr. Mont wants, that's what Mr. Mont gets. And it's that character in the thousands of students that Mr. Mont influenced that gives us reason to celebrate this dedication here today. Thank you, Mr. Mont, for still begging the question after all these years. Why would anybody throw all that perfectly good tea into the Boston Harbor? Mr. Jess Johnson.
It is great to see you, Mr. Mont. And it's great to be here. Florida Gateway College has given so much to my family. It was here that both my parents began their educations. It was here that I did a mentor program that sparked a lifelong, if not professional, interest in physics. And it was here that I spent many happy summers as part of the summer enrichment camps. In making this dedication, the college, its board of trustees, and its students are giving a wholly fitting recognition to a remarkable man. You don't see Mr. Mont's name in many places, but you see his fingerprints all over this community. Certainly in the scholarships he's given that have allowed so many students to attend here, his cherished work with the Swanee Valley Community Foundation, and in the excellent athletic facilities and fields that we have throughout the county. In fact, when I was in high school, Mr. Mont was still personally maintaining much of the landscaping at Columbia High. You'd see him out there in the afternoons planting trees and watering shrubs. I'd wave to him as I left soccer practice. Yeah, these are visible things. But the reason most of us are here today is that we know the rest of the story. Our story of Mr. Mont is of a unique teacher, tennis coach, Sunday school leader, and friend. In the classroom, Mr. Mont didn't so much teach history as he told it. He'd literally stand in front of the classroom at the beginning of each lesson and ask, now where did we leave off? We'd review our notes and tell him, and he'd say, oh yes, and he'd pick it right back up, speaking without notes. There were other special elements of his lessons. He would test us on what he called cultural literacy, in which he'd explain the reason for an idiom or saying, like having an albatross around your neck, or giving it the whole 9 yards. He would read us passages from Paul Harvey's famed The Rest of the Story compilations, explaining the hidden backstory of some otherwise well-known person or event. And we thought it particularly funny when Mr. Mont would use the chalkboard to help illustrate some historical event he was describing. He would draw an absolutely nondescript and often indecipherable squiggle on the board, and then say something like, you recognize the coast of France, as he would describe the invasion of Normandy. While there's so much special that happened in the classroom, we who know the rest of the story know the most magical moments were outside. One particularly vivid memory for me is of an afternoon cookout at his house on Alligator Lake that turned into a campout Jay was there, and I would blame him for any property damage from that night. Mr. Mott had invited the whole class over, and we spent a beautiful afternoon talking on his back porch, grilling hamburgers and hot dogs, and canoeing on the lake. Mr. Mott always had his camera with him, and we took lots of pictures on the dock. And this was before smartphones, but I promise this was an Instagram-worthy moment. We set up our camp, the boys in the yard in tents and the girls on the back porch. As it got dark, we went inside to watch a movie, probably some family-friendly film that Mr. Mott said was okay for us to, quote, watch in mixed company. I remember the 20 or so of us sprawled all over his living room, passing around stacks of old photographs of the classes that went before us, doing the types of things that exactly we were doing in that moment. Generations that had experienced this same special care and love and had stories all their own. I'm not going to name names, but I saw much younger versions of many of you in those photographs. And that was 20 years ago. I could tell you story after story of canoe trips down the Santa Fe River, of plays we watched at the Hippodrome State Theater, of going to the circus in Jacksonville. There truly was no limit to the ways that we found to have fun and to spend time together. A few months ago, Mr. Mott and I were catching up in Patty Ives' living room, and Mr. Mott, you asked me, do you think people will remember all the things we did? Mr. Mott, you and I both know that stories are the most powerful force in the universe. The Lord did all his teaching using stories, and so did you. And the stories we made in those canoes, at your river house, on your back porch, those are going to be told and retold forever. So congratulations and thank you, Mr. Mott.
Our next speaker, who is going to make some remarks, we've got a couple people back to back to back. We have Joe Montgomery, the nephew of James Montgomery.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Dr. Barrett, for this honor today. I'd like to acknowledge members of the Montgomery family that are present here today. James' sister-in-law, June Montgomery, nephews Ed Montgomery, Alan Montgomery and his wife Carol, and Jim Montgomery is here, and James's niece Janet Montgomery Hughes and her husband Tim. And we're all very pleased to be here today. And on behalf of the Montgomery family, we thank you for honoring James in this meaningful and permanent way. In doing so, you honor the Montgomery family and the near 100 years of legacy here in Lake City. James often said that his parents left him a good name, and in fact, it may be harder to keep that good name than it was to receive it. I believe we can all agree here today that he has done more than keep that good name. Congratulations, James. We love you.
Representing the FGC Foundation is Mike Lee.
You can sure tell the difference in the generations. Jess had his notes on an iPad. I've got mine on a piece of paper. So, we're here today to honor, as the old saying goes, an ordinary man who's done extraordinary things. James Montgomery has enriched all of our lives and made this community and this college a better place. James started the first ever endowed scholarship fund at Lake City Community College in the mid-1980s. He planned to start his own scholarship fund until he talked to Phil Moses, and Phil said, we already have a foundation. And James said, what's that? And he said, the Lake City Community College Foundation. Since that time, in the mid-80s, he's awarded almost $250,000 in scholarships to 450 students. And the remarkable thing is he continues to grow that fund, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and it will benefit our students forever. James served on the foundation board for over 30 years, serving as chairman at least twice, and neither he nor I could remember if it was more than that. I suspect it was. He served on numerous committees and was a 2007 Distinguished Friend of our foundation. He named the James Montgomery Reading Room in the Wilson S. Library and Media Center with a generous gift, and has never ever missed at least an annual major gift to his endowment fund since it started. He was a fundraiser's dream because you never ever had to ask him. What was difficult is you sure hoped you could live up to his expectations. 2 of our 3 daughters were in his dual enrollment classes, and the middle one, Chelsea, they had a test one time. I saw James. I said, James, how did Chelsea do? She made a 98. And of course, I'm thinking she got her brains from her dad, and I'm pretty proud. And he said, no. She missed one question, and she should have known the answer to that. So I knew then he had high expectations. Some people do great things once or twice, like a shooting star. James does great things every single day of his life, from small kindnesses to major gifts. I liken him to the ever-ready bunny. He just keeps on going and giving of himself. Once he came into our office to, again, give a gift, as he always did, and he told me when he got ready to leave, he said, Mike, he said, I've got to go buy gas today. It's Wednesday. And every Wednesday, I buy gas and I buy a lottery ticket. And I said, Mr. Mont, I said, nothing wrong with buying a lottery ticket. It kind of surprises me, though, that you being a religious man, that you're going to buy a lottery ticket. And he got a little exasperated, and he said, I don't know why the Lord doesn't let me win the lottery. I said, James, no offense, we have 3 kids. I don't know why he doesn't let me win it either. And he looked me right in the eye, and he said, the Lord knows I'd give it all away. 2 weeks later, I saw him in a function. I said, James, I've been praying for you. He said, well, thank you. Why is that? I said, you remember when you said you'd give that lottery away? He said, yeah, I've been praying you'd win it and give half to the college. I think I'll change my opening remark about an ordinary man doing extraordinary things and say that James Montgomery is an extraordinary man who has done extraordinary things. James, we all love you for who you are and what you stand for, but you've made it easy for us to love you because you've loved us so much. When younger generations who don't know James look at this building and ask, who is James Montgomery? We can simply tell them he's someone you hope and should try to be like. We love you, James.
We've got the Mike show. We have Mike Millikin, former superintendent of schools for Columbia County, representing the school system.
Hello, everyone. My part of the program today is to recount and go over some of the many educational accomplishments and contributions that Mr. Montgomery has made to our community here in Lake City. And also to acknowledge that he knew that penny loafers never went out of style. See, Mr. Mont? Wearing my shoes. A quick review. Most people here know that Mr. Mont went off to college to become a preacher. But when he got there, he started working with a church youth group, and he came back to Lake City as a teacher. And teach he did. As most don't know, he began as an elementary teacher at 5 Points Elementary in 1959. He taught 4 years at 5 Points, 40 years at CHS, teaching dual enrollment, what at the time was Lake City Community College, and 14 years following retirement here at Florida Gateway College as an adjunct professor teaching dual enrollment for CHS students, for a total of 58 years in education. Wow. Many people here, in fact most probably remember his years as the girls' tennis coach. He started the first team in 1968 and he coached for 20 years. A fun fact, he also started the first boys' team in 1963, but he had to stop when he went to work on his master's degree. When he finished, the boys had a coach, so then he went and he started the girls' team. During this time, he also ran a summer youth tennis program for the recreation department, and for 22 summers, a generation of young people learned the game. These young people would grow to love him, and of course they would request him as a teacher, and their children and grandchildren would as well over the years. Some more fun facts, or as he would put it, just for funsies, he's married or assisted in over 100 weddings of former students. He gave 22 baccalaureate speeches, at one time 12 in a row. 22 of the 40 years he taught at CHS, over half the graduation speeches while he was a teacher at Columbia High School. As many remember, additionally, he also called the roll of graduates at CHS from 1973 to 1999, 26 years. He personally worked on the original landscaping and the entrance to CHS, the tennis courts, softball, baseball, football fields, and many years he helped financially remodeling various athletic facilities, including the softball and the major renovation of the CHS tennis complex. And of course, you would see him at the stands at various sporting events watching his students play the games. Once a student of Mr. Mont, you were one of his kids forever. He has received too many educational awards to list them all, but the highest, of course, was the School Systems Teacher of the Year in 2003-2004. It can be debated what is the lasting legacy of James Montgomery, and there are many. But simply put, he touched lives, and thousands of students, Florida Gateway College, and Lake City are the better for it. We love you, Mr. Moss.
I was asked to talk for about 12 minutes. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. My role here is to just say thank you to a gentleman in front of us who's given his entire life to this community, who's given every fiber of his being, who's been somebody, friend, teacher, inspiration on every level, who's done more for this community than I can imagine any one man ever doing. For us to take the time out to say thank you to him is the least that any of us can do. For us to put a name on a building is the least that we can do as a college, because this man has done so much for everybody in this audience sitting here. I can't put into words how he has touched my life personally, and I know each of you feel that way about how he has worked in your life. I remember being a student and thinking, how am I supposed to learn all of this? And wait, it's not multiple choice? I thought life was multiple choice. And come to find out, Mr. Mont was right. Life is not multiple choice. You have choices to make, but it's about appreciating and understanding on a level that's greater than just A, B, C, or D, and Mr. Mont did that for each of us. The way he taught us in a high school level, then to have him in this building, to be his student, and then to now be able to give him the gratitude, just a fraction of what he's given to us, and to let him know how much we love him, and that every time we walk on this campus, we'll think about not just the name on the building, but what it means to us and how those memories will live on. Whether we're having a good day or a bad day, I can't help but smile if I see Mr. Mont's name. And I want to say thank you, because you mean so much to not just me, but every single person who's here for you, and we love you. And this is the least we could do for somebody who gave every last bit of his being to us. And you live on in us forever. Thank you.
Good morning. I will be brief also. Just would like to acknowledge the trustees that are with us today that allowed us to recognize Mr. Montgomery with this building. Dr. James Sorensen is in the back, Dr. Miguel Tepedino, Ms. Suzanne Norris, Mr. Chuck Brannon. Is anybody else here that I didn't miss? There's so many of you out there. I'd also like to thank the Montgomery family and all the wonderful speakers today. What a wonderful morning to dedicate this building in honor of Mr. Montgomery. James has had the impact for over 58 years on all of us. Whether you've only known him a short period of time, like me, for the past 4 years, or his entire life, you know that the man has impacted thousands of individuals in this community, and also many we don't know about through his scholarships of over 450 students. His impact and presence are felt the minute you meet him. Through the past 4 years, I've called him Mr. Montgomery, James, and Mr. Mont. It does not matter what I called him, but he's been a friend to me, a mentor, researcher, listener, and a great storyteller. He was one of the first persons who welcomed me to this community without bias and told me one thing: be yourself. One of the special moments that comes to mind I had with James was in November of 2017 when I visited him. I asked him if he had any information on the soldiers of the Illusti battle, because the Illusti Festival asked this outsider to give the cemetery speech at the opening of the Illusti Festival in February of 2018. Mr. Montgomery, 3 days later with assistants, arrived at my office with a nurse's help and handed me this old folder, you remember this, and with some old notes in it about the deaths of soldiers. He said, "I know you'll do a great job, and I'll see you at the cemetery in February." Lo and behold, on that day in February, he showed up. But Mr. Montgomery, in that speech, was a good one, not because of me, but because of him. James was teaching dual enrollment American history classes at Columbia High for FGC when I arrived. And as though I had met him, I heard about this man called Mr. Montgomery. It was the best teacher in the world, but would not use technology. I remember he was in Andrew Porter's classroom, and I decided to see for myself his teaching and observed and was captivated how he taught history through stories and student writing assignments. I visited him a total of 3 times teaching until he no longer could teach in April of 2017, not to observe, but to learn and to see how students loved and learned American history. During that period of time, the local Rotarian Club of Lake City often had James come and give us history lessons on President's Day, Veterans Day, and also the history of Thanksgiving. I think he liked the food mainly. At FGC, we decided that we needed to preserve Mr. Mont's knowledge and expertise for future and current generations and created a 10-video series called Conversations with Mr. James Montgomery that was broadcast on cable television and is still available on YouTube. We all have great stories about James, and this ceremony could go on and on for many days about stories about him. The story that I loved him to tell, and he just told me this story about 3 weeks ago, was about the only student he ever sent to the principal's office from his class. Over 60 years of teaching, and only 1 student sent to the office. I'm still amazed. But as you former students know, if you were late to get to class, you were told by Mr. Mont that you had to bring candy to the entire class as punishment. Well, this young man would not after 3 requests. And Mr. Mont said, quote, "You bring in suckers or you go to the office," unquote. The student said, "I will go to the office." I expected Mr. Mont to be upset telling me this story out of the thousands of students that would not follow his wishes. He told me it was a disappointment, but I asked whatever happened to that student, and he smiled and said, "I married him and his wife about 5 years later, and we still keep in touch." That's Mr. Mont. About 2 months ago, when I was visiting with James, I told him I wanted to go to the BOT, Board of Trustees, and ask to name a building for all his work in education and through his scholarship program. He was quiet and said he would be honored. I told him it would have to be approved by the BOT, but that I believed if ever an individual deserved a building honor, it was for him. Last week, the trustees approved of the building naming. The past few weeks, he's been excited about this day, and he's been laser focused on being with us today. Facebook and social media would have worked to let him see it, but as we all know, technology is just not Mr. Mont. So in conclusion, while I started visiting with James a few months ago at his house, I called to make time to come and visit. Each time I made a visit to James, James would tell me to visit anytime, but that between 2 and 3 was his special time with Mary. After about 3 visits of hearing this, I got up my nerve to ask Mr. Mont who was Mary, and I had never heard of a special person by Mary. And he grinned, he told me, of course, Mary Tyler Moore. Her show is on every day at that time, and that's my favorite TV show. So as I begin, no, cut it. All right. So as I begin thinking about how to close my remarks, I decided to watch a few Mary Tyler Moore episodes. How many people have seen that show or remember it? Well, each show starts off with the music theme that you just heard. Love is all around. Does anybody remember that song and words? Well, for his honor, I changed the lyrics of that song. And I was going to sing it, but I can't. I could, but I can't because I'll probably break down. Who can turn the world on with a smile? Who can take a nothing day and suddenly make it seem worthwhile? Well, it's you, James, and you should know it. With each glance at every little movement, you show it. Love is all around because of your living. It's time to let some others do some giving. You have helped students make it after all. You've helped us all make it after all. Thank you so much. Love you. I'd like to now introduce Suzanne Norris, Florida Board of Trustees, who will read a proclamation about James.
Good morning, and I am so honored to be here to participate in honoring a very special person in all of our lives. I'd like to read to you a proclamation. Proclamation, Mr. James Montgomery Day, May 20th, 2019. Whereas the Florida Gateway College District Board of Trustees has the utmost respect and admiration for Mr. James Montgomery, who has dedicated his life and talents to the education of our students, Florida's most precious and important resource. And whereas the Florida Gateway College District Board of Trustees recognizes the valuable contribution of Mr. James Montgomery's continued commitment to provide a quality education for all students through scholarships. And whereas the Florida Gateway College District Board of Trustees recognizes that the quality of all students' educational experience depends significantly and vitally upon the quality of their teachers. Whereas Mr. James Montgomery has had a vital role in realizing the vision for Florida public education. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Florida Gateway College District Board of Trustees expresses their grateful appreciation to Mr. James Montgomery, for his contributions to the education of students, and designated the day of May 20th, 2019 as Mr. Mont Day in the Florida Gateway College District, and Building 2 of the Florida Gateway College main campus will be officially named as the James Montgomery Building, Mr. Mont. The Board of Trustees, Ms. Suzanne Norris, Ms. Renee Allen, Ms. Catherine McGinnis, Mr. Lindsay Lander, Mr. Robert Brannon, Dr. Miguel Tepedino, Dr. Athena Randolph, Mr. David Crawford, and Dr. James Surrency, President Dr. Lawrence Barrett.